My name is Lena, and at 29 years old, I thought I knew what marriage meant: partnership, trust, love. But standing in that courtroom 7 months pregnant, watching footage I didn't even remember being recorded, I realized how blind I'd been. My husband always said I was too sensitive, too dramatic, that pregnancy was making me weak. His mother agreed, of course. For months, I believed them. I worked until I collapsed, apologized for things that weren't my fault, and convinced myself that this was just what marriage looked like. Then one night, a hospital security camera captured something that would change everything. The truth, it turns out, doesn't need me to defend it, it just needs to be seen. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment below telling me where you're from, and make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories. The alarm went off at 5:30, and I was already awake. I'd been lying there for the past hour, listening to Ethan's steady breathing beside me, feeling the dull ache in my lower back that never really went away anymore. 6 months pregnant, and sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford, not because of the baby pressing against my ribs, but because of the knot of anxiety that tightened in my chest every morning before he woke up. I slipped out of bed carefully, my hand instinctively cradling my rounded belly as I padded toward the kitchen. The house was cold, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I turned on the stove and cracked 3 eggs into the pan, watching them sizzle and pop in the melted butter. By the time Ethan appeared in the doorway, showered and dressed in his pressed work shirt, breakfast was plated and waiting at the table. He sat down without looking at me, scrolling through his phone with one hand while lifting his fork with the other. I poured his coffee, added 2 sugars the way he liked it, and set it beside his plate. "Eggs are cold," he muttered, not looking up. My stomach clenched. I just made them. Let me. Forget it. He pushed the plate away slightly, his jaw tight. Can't even get breakfast right. I swallowed the apology forming on my lips and turned back to the counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. The baby shifted inside me, a gentle flutter that should have felt like comfort but only reminded me how fragile everything had become. He left 20 minutes later, without saying goodbye. I was folding laundry in the living room when the doorbell rang that afternoon. Through the peephole, I saw Margaret's perfectly coiffed hair and Ethan's sister Julia beside her, both holding their designer purses like shields.
My heart sank.
"Lena, dear," Margaret said sweetly as I opened the door, though her eyes scanned the entryway with barely concealed disapproval. "We thought we'd stop by. Make sure you're managing everything." Julia followed her in, wrinkling her nose slightly. "It's a bit cluttered in here, isn't it?" I glanced around the living room, at the folded laundry basket, the couple of magazines on the coffee table, my laptop open on the couch where I'd been working earlier. Cluttered? This was the cleanest the house had been all week. "I've been working from home," I said quietly, closing the door. "Trying to help with bills." Margaret settled onto the couch like a queen on a throne, smoothing her skirt. "Yes, Ethan mentioned you're finally contributing again. Though I must say, when we told you a good wife stays home and takes care of her family, we didn't expect you'd let the house fall apart in the process." The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. I'd left my marketing job 18 months ago. Ethan's idea, not mine. He'd convinced me it was for the best, that we'd be happier if I focused on making our house a home. But now that money was tight, suddenly I was lazy for not working. Suddenly, staying home was a character flaw. "I'm doing my best," I said softly. Julia exchanged a look with her mother. "You look tired, Lena. Are you sure you're taking care of yourself? Pregnancy isn't an excuse to let yourself go." I wanted to scream that I was exhausted because I worked 40 hours a week from this very couch while 6 months pregnant, that I cleaned and cooked and tried desperately to be enough for a man who made me feel like I'd never be. But I just smiled weakly and offered them tea. When Ethan came home that evening, Margaret was still there. She'd stayed for hours, her commentary a steady drip of poison. "You should really organize that pantry. The bathroom could use a deep clean. Are you sure you're eating enough? You look swollen. How was your day, honey?" Ethan asked, kissing his mother's cheek. "Oh, fine. Just checking on your poor wife. She seems overwhelmed." Ethan's eyes slid to me, and I saw the suspicion flicker there. You okay, babe? I'm fine, I said quickly. Just tired. She's always tired, Margaret sighed dramatically. I worry she's not handling things well. Later, after she left, I found Ethan in our bedroom staring at his phone. I started to change into my pajamas, wincing as I bent to pull them from the drawer. Mom's worried about you, he said without looking up. I'm okay. Really? She says you were napping when she got here. I froze. I wasn't, I was working. My laptop was right there on the couch. She said you looked like you'd just woken up. My throat tightened. Ethan, I've been working all day. Check my screen time if you don't believe me. But he was already taking a photo of me with his phone. What are you doing? Just keeping track, he said casually. You know, in case you forget how much you actually rest versus how much you claim to work. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I turned away, blinking back tears, and climbed into bed without another word. The next few days passed in a fog of quiet humiliation. Ethan started watching me constantly, noting when I sat down, when I checked my phone, when I paused to catch my breath. His mother's words had planted seeds of doubt, and now they were blooming into full-blown paranoia. One evening, he invited friends over for dinner without warning me. They'll be here at 7, he announced at 5:30. Make that pasta thing. And put on something nice. I stared at him. Ethan, I'm exhausted. I worked all day and I'm not feeling. Lena. His voice dropped to that dangerous, quiet tone. I'm not asking. So I cooked. I showered and changed into a maternity dress that didn't make me feel like a whale. I set the table with our good dishes and smiled when his friends arrived, even though my feet were swelling and my head was pounding. Halfway through dinner, the room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to breathe through the wave of dizziness, but it kept building. My vision blurred at the edges. Lena, someone said, their voice distant. Then I felt myself swaying, my knees buckling. Hands caught me before I hit the floor. Ethan's friend Mark eased me into a chair while his wife fanned me with a napkin. Should we call someone? She asked, worried. No. Margaret's voice cut through the concern like a knife. She'd arrived earlier and stayed for dinner.
Oh, she's fine.
She's just dramatic, always needing attention. She laughed. Actually laughed. I sat there, humiliated, while Ethan's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one argued with her. No one defended me. Least of all my husband. After everyone left, Ethan cornered me in the kitchen. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? His voice was cold, controlled. Fainting like some Victorian maiden in front of my friends? I didn't mean to. You never mean to. He slammed his hand on the counter, making me flinch. But somehow, you always manage to make me look bad. Ethan, please. Just get out of my sight. I retreated to our bedroom, my whole body trembling. I sank onto the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Mara, I texted my best friend. Something feels wrong lately.
I'm scared to rest.
She replied within minutes. You can come to my place anytime. I mean it, Lena. Anytime. But I couldn't. Where would I even begin to explain? How could I tell her that the man I married, the man whose baby I was carrying, had become someone I barely recognized? I looked up at our wedding photo on the wall, Ethan's arm around my waist, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. His smile in that picture felt like it belonged to a stranger. What happened to us? I whispered to the empty room. The baby kicked a small flutter against my ribs. I placed my hand over the spot, tears sliding down my cheeks. The next morning, Ethan handed me a printed spreadsheet over breakfast. What's this? I asked, scanning the columns of numbers. Household expenses. Broken down by month.
He sipped his coffee calmly.
You're going back to work. Full-time remote. I already found you a data entry position through Mike. You start Monday. But I'm already working, and the baby isn't due for 3 more months. You'll be fine. Ethan. You owe me that much, Lena. His eyes met mine cold and flat. After everything I've provided for you. I stared at the spreadsheet, the numbers blurring as tears welled up. My hands trembled as I gripped the paper. Okay, I whispered. Because what else could I say? Monday arrived too quickly. I sat at our dining table with my laptop open, staring at the endless spreadsheets of data that needed entering. The job was mind-numbing, copying numbers from one system to another, checking boxes, confirming entries. My back ached after the first hour. By lunch, my wrists were cramping. But I didn't dare stop. Ethan had installed a productivity tracker on my computer. He could see every minute I worked, every break I took, every second I spent idle. At first, I thought maybe he just wanted accountability. But then the text started coming. Why were you idle for 6 minutes at 10:23? You took a 17-minute lunch. We agreed on 15. Your productivity score is below target. Focus. I texted back explanations. Bathroom break. The baby was kicking. I needed water, but his responses grew colder each time. By the end of the first week, I'd stopped defending myself entirely. I just worked, my fingers flying across the keyboard even when the cramping in my hands made me want to cry. Margaret's daily visits became routine torture. She'd let herself in with the spare key Ethan had given her, always arriving around lunchtime when she knew I'd be working. She'd wander through the house making comments. Is this how you keep the kitchen? The baseboards are filthy. Are you really wearing that? While I tried desperately to focus on my work. One afternoon, she stood behind me while I typed, watching over my shoulder. You can't even keep a man happy, she said softly. How will you ever raise a baby? My fingers froze on the keyboard. The baby shifted inside me, as if sensing my distress. I'm doing my best, I said quietly. Your best isn't very good, is it? When Ethan came home that evening, I thought about telling him how his mother spoke to me. But he was scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. And when I opened my mouth, the words died in my throat. What was the point? He'd just take her side. He always did. The pain started 2 weeks later. It was sharp, sudden, a stabbing sensation low in my abdomen that made me gasp and double over at my laptop. I pressed my hand against my belly, breathing slowly, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. For the next few days, the pain came and went in waves. Sometimes it was dull and manageable. Other times it was so intense I had to stop working and lie down, terrified that something was wrong with the baby. But I didn't tell Ethan. I couldn't. The last time I'd mentioned feeling unwell, he'd rolled his eyes and said, "You're pregnant, not dying. Stop being dramatic." So I hid it. I worked through the pain, took breaks when he wasn't monitoring too closely, and prayed it would go away on its own. That Friday, Ethan's parents came for dinner. I'd spent all afternoon cooking, pot roast, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, homemade rolls. My feet were swollen, my back screaming, but I kept moving because the alternative was facing Ethan's disappointment. We were halfway through the meal when it happened. I stood to clear the salad plates, and the room tilted. I reached for the table to steady myself, but my hands were shaking, my vision tunneling. The plates slipped from my fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. "Lena." Ethan's voice was sharp. I looked down at the broken ceramic scattered around my feet, my ears ringing.
I'm sorry, you whispered.
I got dizzy. Ethan grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin. "Get it together," he hissed under his breath, his face inches from mine. His mother laughed, that awful, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Ethan, it's fine. She's just clumsy." His father didn't say anything. No one did. Ethan released my wrist, and I dropped to my knees, gathering the broken pieces with trembling hands. Blood welled up from a small cut on my palm, but I barely felt it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Ethan's breathing beside me. Around midnight, I heard voices downstairs, his voice and Margaret's. I crept out of bed and stood at the top of the stairs, straining to hear. "Keeps whining, I'll send her to her mother's. Let her figure it out." "Don't." Margaret's voice was firm. "She'll play the victim. Make you look like the bad guy." I'm not the bad guy here. I'm barely holding it together financially, and she acts like she's doing me a favor by working part-time. You're too soft on her, Ethan. She needs structure.
Discipline.
I backed away from the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. Send me to my mother's. Discipline. I was his wife, the mother of his child. And he was talking about me like I was a disobedient pet. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand with shaking hands. Mara, I typed. Can we meet tomorrow? I think something's wrong with my baby. Her response came immediately, yes. Come to the hospital. I'm working the morning shift. I'll make sure you're seen. I set the phone down and curled onto my side, one hand on my belly, tears streaming silently into my pillow. The next morning, Ethan woke me at 5 a.m., yanking the blankets off. Get up. My parents are coming for breakfast. I blinked groggily. What? I said get up and make breakfast for my parents. His voice was hard, impatient. They're driving 2 hours to see us. The least you can do is feed them. Margaret appeared in the doorway, already dressed and made up despite the early hour. You deserve this, she said coolly, her eyes raking over my rumpled pajamas. Maybe it'll teach you some responsibility. The pain hit me then, sharp, worse than before. I gasped, clutching my stomach. Stop being dramatic, Ethan snapped.
Get
up. But I couldn't. The pain radiated through my abdomen, stealing my breath. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't support me. Ethan, I gasped. Something's wrong. Oh, for God's sake. He turned and walked out, Margaret following him with a disgusted shake of her head. I heard them in the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the murmur of conversation. They were making breakfast themselves, leaving me crumpled on the bedroom floor. My phone was on the nightstand. I reached for it, my vision swimming. Mara, I typed, my fingers clumsy. Help. Something's wrong.
please.
Then everything went black. I woke up to beeping. Steady, rhythmic beeping that matched the pounding in my head. My eyes fluttered open, and white ceiling tiles came into focus. Hospital. I was in a hospital. Lena? A familiar voice, soft and warm. I turned my head, slowly, because everything hurt, and saw Mara sitting in the chair beside my bed. Her scrubs were wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes. How long had she been here? Hey, she said, taking my hand. You're okay. You're safe. The baby... My voice came out raspy, panicked. He's okay. She squeezed my hand. Heartbeat strong. You both scared me, but you're going to be fine. Relief flooded through me so intensely, I started crying. Mara grabbed tissues from the bedside table and handed them to me, waiting patiently while I fell apart. What happened? I finally managed to ask. You collapsed. You texted me, and I called 911 immediately. They brought you in unconscious. Her jaw tightened. Severe dehydration, stress-induced complications, dangerously high blood pressure. Lena, you could have lost him. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on surviving each day, on meeting Ethan's demands, that I'd nearly killed my own baby. Where's Ethan? Something flickered in Mara's eyes. Anger, maybe, or disgust. He wasn't allowed in for long. There was something in her tone that made my stomach clench, but before I could ask, the door opened. Ethan walked in carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers, his expression carefully arranged into concern. Babe, he said, setting the flowers on the windowsill. Thank God you're awake. Mara stood abruptly. I'll give you two some privacy, she said, but her voice was cold. She squeezed my hand once more and left, closing the door behind her. Ethan pulled the chair closer to my bed and sat down, his face hardening the moment we were alone. You humiliated me again, he said quietly. Everyone thinks I mistreat you. My mother's been fielding calls all day. I stared at him. I almost lost our baby. Because you don't take care of yourself. Because you're always overdramatic and... I collapsed because I'm exhausted, Ethan. Because I work nonstop while pregnant, and you still tell me it's not enough. Don't. His voice dropped to that dangerous quiet. Don't try to make this my fault. You brought this on yourself. I turned my face away, tears sliding down my temples. He stayed for exactly 10 more minutes, making small talk like we were discussing the weather, before leaving to handle things at home. The door closed behind him, and I was alone with the beeping machines and the weight of my own failure. The next day, Dr. Harris came to check on me. He was older, kind-faced, with wire-rimmed glasses and gentle hands. He examined my chart, took my vitals, and then sat in the chair Mara had occupied the night before. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "I need to ask you some questions. They might be uncomfortable, but they're important." My heart rate picked up. "Okay. Do you feel safe at home?" The question hung in the air between us. I opened my mouth to say yes, of course, but the lie wouldn't come. I don't know." He nodded slowly, making a note. "I noticed some bruising on your wrist. Can you tell me how that happened?" I looked down at my arm, where finger-shaped marks had bloomed purple and yellow. "Ethan, grabbing me during dinner. I fell." I lied. Dr. Harris didn't argue, but I could see he didn't believe me. "We have protocols for situations like yours," he said gently. "Resources, support systems. If you ever need help." "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Really? It's just pregnancy is hard." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm ordering another few days of observation. Standard procedure for complications like yours." But something in his tone told me it wasn't just standard procedure.
He was buying me time.
Protecting me in the only way he could without overstepping. After he left, I lay there staring at the ceiling, Dr. Harris's words echoing in my mind. "Do you feel safe at home?"
No.
The answer was no, and I'd known it for months. I overheard them 2 days later, nurses whispering outside my door. "That's the husband from room 312's camera footage. She might hear." I sat up straighter, my heart pounding.
Camera footage?
What camera footage? Mara came in shortly after, carrying a cup of ice chips. She saw my face and set them down carefully. "What did they mean?" I asked. "About camera footage?" She hesitated, then sat on the edge of my bed. "Lena, hospitals have security cameras. Standard practice, especially in patient rooms. For safety. And something was recorded. The night you were admitted." She took my hand. "But don't worry about it right now. Just focus on healing." "Mara, what was recorded?" "I can't." She pressed her lips together. "It's complicated. There are protocols. But I promise you, Lena, whatever happens, you're not alone in this anymore." 2 days later, Ethan filed for my early discharge. Dr. Harris argued against it, saying I needed more observation, but Ethan was insistent. "She's fine," he told the doctor, his charming smile back in place. "She wants to come home. Don't you, honey?" What I wanted was irrelevant. I nodded mutely. Mara pulled me aside while Ethan was signing paperwork. "I copied something," she whispered, "to a secure file. Just in case. You understand." I didn't, but I nodded anyway. That night, back in our house, everything felt wrong. The walls were too close, the air too heavy. Ethan was eerily calm, almost cheerful, making dinner and asking about my day like the past week hadn't happened. "Let's start over," he said, setting his phone face down on the counter. "Fresh start, okay?" But I could hear the falseness in his voice, could see the calculation in his eyes. He was planning something. I just didn't know what. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Mara called me. "Don't react," she said quietly when I answered. "Just listen." I stepped into the bathroom, closing the door softly. "I watched the footage," she continued, "from the hospital. Lena, it's bad. Really bad." "What did he do?" There was a pause then. "He came into your room at 2:47 a.m. You were unconscious. He tried to wake you. He was angry." The audio picked up. She trailed off. "You'll regret ever crossing me." That's what he said. My blood ran cold. "I've made copies," Mara said firmly. "And I've spoken to Dr. Harris. We have your medical records, the footage, everything. When you're ready, when you're safe, we can use it." I sank onto the closed toilet seat, my free hand pressed against my mouth to keep from sobbing. "Thank you," I whispered. "You're my best friend," she said simply. I won't let him get away with this. After we hung up, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, a ghost of who I used to be. But underneath the exhaustion, underneath the fear, something new was stirring. Anger. I started planning in secret. It began small, reaching out to my old boss, asking if there were any freelance opportunities. She remembered me, remembered my work, and within a week, I had 2 small contracts. Nothing major, but it was mine. Money that Ethan didn't know about, couldn't track, couldn't control. I opened a separate bank account using Mara's address, depositing the freelance payments there. Every dollar felt like a tiny brick in the wall I was building between myself and this life that was suffocating me. I was 7 months pregnant now. My belly was huge, my back constantly aching, but I worked through it. During the day, I did the data entry job Ethan monitored. At night, after he fell asleep, I worked on my freelance projects in the bathroom with the door locked, my laptop balanced on my knees. I was exhausted. But I was also, for the first time in months, hopeful. Margaret noticed the change first. I'd started wearing makeup again just a little, just enough to feel human. I'd bought a new maternity dress with my freelance money, something that actually fit and made me feel pretty instead of like a whale. Small things that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. She cornered me in the kitchen one afternoon while Ethan was at work. "You're plotting something," she said, her eyes narrowed. "I can tell." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play stupid with me, girl." She stepped closer, invading my space. "You think you can leave my son? You think you can just walk away?" "I haven't said anything about leaving. But you're thinking it. I see it in your eyes." She poked my shoulder with one perfectly manicured finger. "You're nothing without him. You understand that? Nothing." After she left, I called Mara, shaking. "She knows something's different," I said. "What if she tells Ethan?" "Let her," Mara said firmly. "We're ready whenever you are. You've got the medical records, the footage, witness testimony from the hospital staff. You're not trapped anymore, Lena."
But it didn't feel that way.
It felt like the walls were closing in. The next day, Ethan installed a camera in our living room. "Just for security," he said casually, mounting it above the TV. "There've been break-ins in the neighborhood." I knew it wasn't for break-ins. It was for me. Now, he could watch me even when he wasn't home. Monitor whether I was working, resting, eating, existing in a way that met his approval. The lens felt like an eye following me everywhere, judging my every move. I started spending more time in the bedroom and bathroom, the only spaces without cameras. Ethan found the receipts on a Tuesday evening. I'd been careless, leaving a few printed confirmations for my freelance work in my laptop bag. He must have gone through it while I was in the shower because when I came out, he was sitting on our bed holding the papers, his face dark with rage. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. My stomach dropped. "It's just some freelance work."
Some
freelance work? He stood up, waving the papers. "You're working behind my back? Making money I don't know about. I just wanted to save some extra for the baby. You can't do anything without me." He slammed the papers onto the dresser, making me flinch. "Nothing. You understand? You don't work unless I tell you to work. You don't make decisions unless I approve them. You are my wife. I'm not your property." The words burst out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's face went carefully blank. "What did you just say?" I backed toward the door, my hand protectively over my belly. "I'm trying to provide for our child. That's all." "Get out of my sight," he said quietly. Too quietly. I fled to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, and sat on the floor with my back against the tub, crying as silently as I could. The argument exploded 3 days later. We were eating dinner, or rather, I was pushing food around my plate while Ethan scrolled through his phone, when I finally said what had been building inside me for weeks. "You nearly cost our baby its life." His head snapped up. "What?" "When you forced me to work while I was collapsing. When you ignored every sign that something was wrong. You could have killed him." My voice was shaking but steady. "Our son almost died because you cared more about controlling me than keeping us safe." Ethan stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, this cold, terrible smile that made my skin crawl. Maybe if you'd listened better, he said softly, none of that would have happened. The casualness of it, the complete lack of remorse, broke something inside me. I stood up from the table and walked to our bedroom, closing the door behind me. Then I pulled out my phone and called the number Mara had given me weeks ago, a legal advocate who specialized in domestic cases. I need help, I said when she answered. I need to get out. The legal notice arrived 3 days later. Temporary restraining order, pending a court hearing. Mara and Dr. Harris had already submitted their testimony. The hospital footage was officially entered as evidence. I wasn't there when Ethan opened the envelope, but I heard about it from Margaret's panicked phone call. "What have you done?" she shrieked. "You're ruining our family name. You ungrateful." I hung up on her. That evening, Ethan stormed the hospital where Mara worked. I heard about it later. How he tried to confront her, how security had to physically remove him, how she'd stood calmly in front of him and said, "You might have fooled her for a while, but cameras don't lie." I'd moved into Mara's apartment by then. She'd set up the guest room with everything I needed, a comfortable bed, prenatal vitamins, herbal tea. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I spent the days preparing with my attorney, going over every detail, every incident, every moment of control and cruelty. It was exhausting, reliving it all, but also strangely cathartic. The night before court, I stood at Mara's window, looking out at the city lights, one hand resting on my belly. The baby was moving more now, stronger kicks that sometimes took my breath away. "You're my reason to fight," I whispered to him. "You're why I'm doing this." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the clouds for a brief, brilliant moment. A storm was coming, but this time, I wasn't afraid of it. This time, I was the storm. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they should have. I stood at the bottom, one hand pressed against my lower back, the other cradling my 7-month belly. The gray maternity dress Mara had helped me pick out was simple, professional, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. Just a pregnant woman seeking justice. "Ready?" Mara squeezed my hand. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We climbed the steps together, my attorney Rachel walking slightly ahead, her heels clicking with confident precision. Inside, the marble floors echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. The air smelled like old wood and anxiety. My stomach twisted as we approached courtroom 4B. Through the small window in the door, I could see people already gathering, reporters in the back rows, strangers who'd somehow heard about the case, and
Ethan.
He stood near the defendant's table in a crisp navy suit, looking every bit the respectable husband, the concerned father-to-be. His lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in pinstripes, was whispering something to him. He nodded, then looked up directly at me through that little window.
He smirked.
My breath caught. Mara felt me freeze and immediately stepped between us, blocking his view. "Don't look at him," she said firmly. "Look at me. You're not alone anymore." I focused on her face, on the kindness in her eyes, and forced myself to breathe. "You're not alone," she repeated. We entered the courtroom. The gallery was more packed than I'd expected. I recognized a few faces, some nurses from a hospital, Dr. Harris sitting near the back, a couple of journalists with their notebooks ready. And there, 3 rows behind Ethan, sat Margaret with her arms crossed, her expression carved from ice. She stared at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. I sat at the plaintiff's table, Rachel on my right, Mara behind me. My hands trembled as I folded them on the table, so I pressed them against my belly instead. The baby kicked, as if reminding me why we were here. "All rise." Judge Reynolds entered, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She settled into her seat, surveying the courtroom with the air of someone who'd seen every trick, every lie, every manipulation people could conjure. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly. "Let's begin." Ethan's lawyer started strong. She painted him as a devoted husband, a hard-working provider who'd been deeply concerned about my health throughout the pregnancy. She spoke in smooth, practiced tones about the unfortunate misunderstanding that had led to my hospitalization. Mr. Carter was under tremendous financial pressure, she explained, pacing before the jury box. He'd asked his wife to contribute to household expenses, a reasonable request. He never demanded she overwork herself. In fact, my client was devastated to learn of her collapse. I watched Ethan nod along, his expression perfectly calibrated to show concern and hurt. This is a case of marital discord, the lawyer continued, complicated by the stresses of pregnancy. But it is not, as the plaintiff suggests, a case of abuse or coercion. My client has been unfairly vilified for trying to hold his household together during difficult times. When she sat down, Margaret leaned forward and patted Ethan's shoulder. He reached back and squeezed her hand. The performance was flawless. Rachel stood, adjusting her glasses. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence that tells a very different story. One that Mrs. Carter's words alone cannot fully convey, but that medical records, witness testimony, and video evidence will make abundantly clear. She approached the bench with a folder. These are hospital admission records from St. Mary's Medical Center, dated 3 weeks ago. They show that Mrs. Carter was admitted unconscious, severely dehydrated, suffering from stress-induced complications that threatened both her life and her unborn child's. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. Rachel continued. The records indicate bruising consistent with forceful gripping, elevated blood pressure at dangerous levels, and clear signs of prolonged physical and emotional distress. Objection, Ethan's lawyer said smoothly. Pregnancy complications are not uncommon. This proves nothing about my client's conduct. Sustained, but I'll allow the records as evidence, Judge Reynolds said. Continue, Ms. Chen. Rachel called her first witness, Dr. Harris. He took the stand with quiet dignity, his hands folded calmly as he was sworn in. Rachel asked him to describe my condition when I was admitted. Mrs. Carter presented in critical condition, he said, his voice steady. She was unconscious, severely dehydrated, with blood pressure readings that put her at immediate risk of preeclampsia or worse. The fetal heart rate was concerning. Had she not been brought in when she was, we could have lost both mother and child. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of journalists' pens. In your professional opinion, Dr. Harris, what caused Mrs. Carter's condition? Extreme physical and emotional stress over an extended period. Her body was shutting down because it had been pushed far beyond safe limits. I felt tears prick my eyes, but blinked them back. Stay strong. During Mrs. Carter's hospitalization, did you observe anything unusual regarding her husband's behavior? Dr. Harris paused. I noticed Mr. Carter seemed more concerned about appearances than his wife's well-being. He pushed for early discharge against my medical advice. And I was later made aware of an incident captured on hospital security cameras. We'll address that footage shortly, Rachel said. Thank you, Doctor. Ethan's lawyer stood for cross-examination, her smile shark-like. Dr. Harris, you're not a marriage counselor, are you?
No.
So your observations about my client's concern for his wife are simply personal opinions, not medical facts. I've treated enough patients to recognize when someone is genuinely concerned versus when they're managing appearances. But that's still an opinion, isn't it? Dr. Harris met her gaze steadily. It's an informed professional assessment. She shifted tactics. Did Mrs. Carter ever explicitly tell you her husband was abusing her? My heart sank. She indicated she didn't feel safe at home. That's not what I asked. Did she say, my husband is abusing me? No, Dr. Harris admitted quietly. No further questions. As Dr. Harris stepped down, I caught his eye. He gave me a small, reassuring nod. He'd done what he could. During the afternoon recess, I stood in the hallway trying to calm my racing heart. The baby was moving constantly, picking up on my stress. You're doing great, Mara said, appearing at my side with a cup of water. They're making it seem like I'm overreacting. Like I'm... Lena. She took my hands. We have the footage. That changes everything. Just hold on a little longer. Before I could respond, I heard Margaret's voice behind me. You should be ashamed of yourself. I turned slowly. She stood there with 2 other women, Ethan's aunt and cousin. I realized, all three of them looking at me with identical expressions of disdain. Dragging a good man through court because you can't handle a little stress? Margaret continued. You're pathetic. That's enough, Mara said sharply, stepping between us. Stay out of this, nurse. Margaret's lip curled. You're just as guilty, poisoning her mind against her own husband. Mrs. Carter. Rachel appeared, her voice cold and professional. I suggest you leave my client alone, or I'll have the bailiff escort you out. Margaret glared but turned and walked away, her entourage following like ducklings. I was shaking. Mara wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Don't let her get to you, she whispered. She's scared. They're all scared because they know what's coming. When we reconvened, Rachel called me to the stand. The walk from my seat to the witness box felt endless. Every eye in the courtroom was on me, judging, measuring, deciding if I was telling the truth or playing victim. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then I sat, my hands gripping the edge of the wooden chair. Rachel approached with gentle eyes. Mrs. Carter, can you tell the court about your relationship with your husband? I took a breath. It wasn't always like this. When we first married, Ethan was kind, supportive. But after a while, things changed. He became controlling, critical. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Can you give specific examples? He convinced me to quit my job, saying a good wife stays home. But then when money got tight, he blamed me for not working. He installed monitoring software on my computer to track my productivity. My voice cracked. He made me feel like I was worthless. Objection, Ethan's lawyer said. The defendant's feelings about herself are not evidence of wrongdoing. Your Honor, I'm establishing a pattern of psychological abuse, Rachel countered. Overruled. Continue. I described the daily criticisms, Margaret's visits, the escalating demands. I told them about collapsing on the kitchen floor, about working until my hands cramped and my vision blurred. And when you told your husband you were concerned about the pregnancy, he called me dramatic. He said I was always looking for attention. Across the room, Ethan shook his head slowly, his expression pained. Playing the misunderstood husband perfectly. Ethan's lawyer approached for cross-examination, her smile practiced and cold. Mrs. Carter, you agreed to take the data entry position, didn't you? Yes, but... Yes or no, please. Yes. And you were working from home, correct? Not in a factory or construction site. From your own comfortable couch. I was 7 months pregnant. Yes or no? Yes. So really, you're upset that your husband expected you to contribute financially to your household. Is that fair to say? No, that's not. You could have stopped working at any time, couldn't you? You could have told your husband you needed rest. I tried. Did you explicitly say, I need to stop working immediately? I faltered. I told him I was tired. That's not what I asked. Tears burned my eyes. She was twisting everything, making me sound unreasonable, making my suffering sound like inconvenience. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you're simply a woman who couldn't handle the normal stresses of marriage and pregnancy, and now you're trying to blame your husband for your own shortcomings? No, the word burst out. He controlled every aspect of my life. He monitored me constantly. He grabbed me so hard he left bruises. Allegedly left bruises. There are photos, which could have come from any number of sources during pregnancy. Bumping into furniture, normal clumsiness. I'm not lying. No further questions, she said smoothly, walking back to her table. I sat there shaking, feeling like I'd just been shredded. Rachel gave me an encouraging nod as I stepped down, but I felt hollow. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe no one would believe me. That evening, Mara insisted I stay with her instead of going to the temporary apartment the court had arranged. Tomorrow changes everything, she said, handing me chamomile tea. You just need to get through tonight. I sat on her couch, the baby doing gymnastics in my belly, and wondered if she was right. Or if Ethan's perfect performance had already won. The courtroom felt different the next morning, charged somehow. Expectant. Judge Reynolds took her seat and surveyed the room. Ms. Chun, I understand you have video evidence to present. Yes, Your Honor. Rachel stood, holding a USB drive. Hospital security footage from St. Mary's Medical Center, room 312, captured on the night of Mrs. Carter's admission. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment everything would either validate my truth or fall apart. Ethan shifted in his seat, his confident smirk still in place. But I saw his lawyer lean over and whisper something urgent. The bailiff set up a large monitor facing the gallery. Rachel inserted the USB drive. This footage shows Mr. Carter entering his wife's hospital room at 2:47 a.m., approximately 6 hours after she was admitted in critical condition. The screen flickered to life. There I was, lying in that hospital bed, unconscious. Machines beeped steadily around me, for lines snaking from my arms. I looked so small, so vulnerable. Then the door opened, and Ethan walked in. Even in the grainy security footage, his body language was unmistakable, aggressive, angry. No concerned husband rushing to his wife's bedside. He strode to my bed and stood over me, his hands clenched. The audio was faint, but the courtroom was dead silent. Get up. My stomach dropped. That was his voice. Get up. You're embarrassing me even in a hospital. Gasps rippled through the gallery. I couldn't look away from the screen, watching this man I'd married lean over my unconscious body and shake my arm. The machines started beeping frantically. On the footage, my body jerked slightly, an involuntary response to his rough handling. Then Mara's voice, firm and sharp. Sir, you need to leave.
Now.
She fakes everything. Ethan's voice rose, clearer now. She's playing victim, and you're all falling for it. The door burst open, and a security guard appeared. There was a brief struggle. Ethan trying to stay, the guard physically moving him toward the door. You'll regret this, Ethan spat, looking back at my unconscious form. You'll regret ever crossing me. The footage ended. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I was crying. I didn't realize it until Mara pressed tissues into my hand. Tears streamed down my face as I relived that night, a night I didn't even remember because I'd been unconscious, helpless. Judge Reynolds' face had gone cold, her eyes fixed on Ethan. Mr. Carter. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. You will remain seated and silent. Ethan had half risen from his chair, his face red. That's not what it looks like. I said silent. The judge's gavel cracked against the bench. You will have your chance to respond. Until then, you'll show this court the respect it deserves. He sank back down, his lawyer gripping his arm. Rachel approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to note that the audio clearly captures Mr. Carter threatening his unconscious wife, and that hospital staff had to forcibly remove him. This is not the behavior of a concerned husband. Noted, Judge Reynolds said, her tone icy. Rachel called Mara to the stand next. She walked up calmly, professionally, and was sworn in. When Rachel asked her to describe what she witnessed that night, Mara's voice was steady but tinged with anger. I was checking on Mrs. Carter around 2:45 a.m. when I heard raised voices from her room. I entered to find Mr. Carter shaking his wife's arm aggressively while she was unconscious. The fetal monitor was showing distress. What did you do? I told him to leave immediately.
He refused.
He became verbally aggressive, accusing Mrs. Carter of faking her condition. I had to call security to remove him. In your professional opinion as a registered nurse, was Mr. Carter's behavior appropriate for a concerned spouse? Absolutely not. A concerned spouse would have been gentle, worried, asking what they could do to help. Mr. Carter was angry. He wasn't worried about his wife. He was angry that she'd embarrassed him. Ethan's lawyer shot to her feet. Objection. The witness cannot speak to my client's emotional state. I can speak to observable behavior. Mara countered before the judge could respond. And his behavior was consistent with anger and control, not concern and love. Overruled, Judge Reynolds said. The witness's professional observations are irrelevant. During cross-examination, Ethan's lawyer tried to intimidate Mara, stepping close and speaking sharply. Nurse Williams, isn't it true that you're Mrs. Carter's best friend? Yes. So, You're biased in her favor? I'm biased toward the truth, Mara said evenly. Which is why I made sure the security footage was preserved. You had no right to access that footage. Hospital protocol requires security review in potential domestic abuse cases. I followed proper channels. The lawyer's jaw tightened. You poisoned Mrs. Carter against her husband. You convinced her to file this frivolous lawsuit. Objection. Rachel stood. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Judge Reynolds glared at Ethan's lawyer. You'll treat this witness with respect, counselor. This is your only warning. The lawyer backed off, clearly flustered. No further questions. During the lunch recess, I couldn't eat. My stomach was in knots, the baby moving restlessly. Margaret found me in the hallway again, but this time Mara and Rachel flanked me immediately. You little snake, Margaret hissed, her composure finally cracking. You edited that footage. You made my son look like a monster. The footage is timestamped and authenticated by the hospital's security department, Rachel said coldly. Any suggestion otherwise is defamation. He told me it wouldn't go this far, Margaret muttered, more to herself than to us. He said she'd drop it, that she'd be too scared. She cut herself off, realizing what she'd admitted. Rachel smiled thinly. Thank you for that, Mrs. Carter. You just corroborated our timeline. Margaret's face went white. She turned and fled. That afternoon, Rachel presented more evidence. Phone records showing dozens of late-night calls between Ethan and Margaret, texts where he complained about me, whining and being dramatic, and the falsified early discharge papers he'd signed against medical advice. Ethan's lawyer tried to spin it. A son confiding in his mother, nothing sinister, but the damage was done. The court stenographer paused at one point, her hands frozen over her keys, her face pale as she listened to Rachel read one of Ethan's texts aloud. If she doesn't shut up about being tired, I'll give her something to be tired about. Even the bailiff looked disgusted. When the day ended, Judge Reynolds called for a brief recess before closing arguments. I need to be very clear, she said, looking directly at Ethan. This court has seen the footage. This court has heard testimony from medical professionals. You thought no one would see you, Mr. Carter. But the truth never hides. Not in my courtroom. Ethan stared at the floor, his jaw working. As we filed out, Mara took my hand. I told you, she whispered. The camera was your voice when you couldn't speak. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift inside me. Hope. The next morning brought new tactics. Ethan and his lawyer had clearly spent the night strategizing because his demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the confident smirk, replaced by slumped shoulders and reddened eyes, the picture of remorse. Your Honor, his lawyer began, my client would like to make a statement. Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Ethan stood, his voice shaking. I want to apologize. To Lena, to this court. I was under tremendous stress, financial pressure, family expectations. I acted in ways I'm not proud of. But I never meant to hurt her. I love my wife. I love our child. I wanted to scream. Even now, even here, he was performing. The pressure from my mother, he continued, his voice breaking convincingly. She was constantly pushing me to be tougher, to not let Lena manipulate me. I see now that I let her influence me too much. I take responsibility for my actions, but I hope the court understands the mental stress I was under. He sat down, wiping his eyes. Margaret, sitting behind him, looked stricken. She hadn't expected him to throw her under the bus. Rachel stood for redirect, her expression skeptical. Mr. Carter, you claim you were under your mother's influence. Yet these are your text messages, are they not? She held up printed records. Messages sent from your phone, using your words, making threats against your wife. I was venting. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to call her lazy? To say she was faking her pregnancy complications? To threaten her? I was angry. Anger doesn't excuse abuse, Mr. Carter. She approached the bench with another document. Your Honor, I'd like to present phone records showing that Mr. Carter called his mother 17 times in the week leading up to Mrs. Carter's collapse. The call logs show conversations lasting between 15 and 40 minutes. What were you discussing with your mother, Mr. Carter? Rachel asked. Family matters. Personal things. Let me read you a transcript of one conversation, obtained through a warrant. Rachel adjusted her glasses. Your words. I'm going to teach her. She can't just rest whenever she wants. She needs to understand who's in charge here. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Your mother's response. Good. Women like her need structure. Don't let her manipulate you with tears. Margaret shot to her feet. That's out of context. Mrs. Carter, sit down. Judge Reynolds ordered. You are not on trial here. Yet. The last word hung in the air like a threat. Margaret sank back down, her face ashen. Rachel continued, methodical and devastating. Mr. Carter, you signed early discharge papers for your wife despite being told by Dr. Harris that she needed continued observation. Why? I thought she'd be more comfortable at home. Or did you want her away from the hospital staff who were documenting your behavior?
No.
You installed monitoring software on your wife's computer. You tracked her every move. You isolated her from friends and family. This is a textbook pattern of coercive control. Ethan's lawyer objected repeatedly, but each objection was overruled. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Harris was called back to present Lena's complete medical file. Mrs. Carter's condition deteriorated over months, not days, he explained. Elevated blood pressure readings going back 4 months. Weight loss despite being pregnant. Signs of chronic stress and sleep deprivation. These are not normal pregnancy complications. These are the physical manifestations of sustained abuse. If Mrs. Carter hadn't been brought to the hospital when she was, what would have happened? Dr. Harris's face was grave. She would likely have developed eclampsia, which could have resulted in seizures, stroke, or death for both mother and child. The fetal distress readings we observed indicated the baby was already in danger. The courtroom fell silent. Even the journalists stopped writing. So, in your medical opinion, Mr. Carter's actions directly endangered both lives? Yes. During the afternoon session, Rachel called for Margaret to be subpoenaed as a witness. She took the stand reluctantly, her earlier composure completely shattered. Under questioning, she tried to deflect, claiming she'd only wanted to help her son, that she'd been misunderstood. Mrs. Carter, did you not tell your son that Mrs. Carter was faking her pregnancy complications? I may have said something like that, but did you encourage him to make her continue working despite her condition? She was capable of working. She was just lazy. Your Honor, I'd like to note that the witness just called a woman with documented medical complications lazy. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Margaret's hands trembled. I only wanted what was best for my son. What was best? Or, what gave you control? Rachel pressed. Did you enjoy undermining your daughter-in-law? Making her feel worthless? Objection. Ethan's lawyer tried weakly. Overruled. I don't have to answer that. You do, actually, Judge Reynolds said coldly. Answer the question. Margaret's face crumpled. She wasn't good enough for him. She trapped him with that pregnancy. She's married to him, Mrs. Carter. Pregnancy isn't a trap, it's a consequence of marriage. She ruined his life. The admission hung in the air. Margaret seemed to realize what she'd said and pressed her hand to her mouth. Rachel turned to the judge. No further questions. Outside the courtroom during the evening recess, Mara found me sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. He's falling apart in there, she said gently, sitting beside me. They both are. I almost feel sorry for him, I admitted. For 1 second, seeing him cry, I almost. Don't. Mara took my hand firmly. He's not sorry for what he did. He's sorry he got caught. There's a difference. I know. He never thought you'd stand up. That's why this is destroying him. Not guilt. Wounded pride. She was right. Ethan wasn't grieving the loss of our relationship. He was humiliated that his victim had found her voice. The next morning brought Ethan's lawyer's last desperate attempt, a plea deal. My client is willing to attend anger management classes, pay any medical expenses, and agree to supervised visitation with the child once born. Judge Reynolds looked at Rachel. Counselor. Rachel stood. My client rejects any plea deal that doesn't include a formal admission of abuse, a protective order, and mandatory counseling specifically for domestic abusers, not generic anger management. The judge nodded. Request denied, counselor. Will proceed to verdict. Ethan's face went pale. His lawyer slumped in her chair. Margaret stood up suddenly. Your Honor, please. He's my son. He made mistakes, but he doesn't deserve. Mrs. Carter, one more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt.
Sit down.
She sat, tears streaming down her face. Judge Reynolds took a long moment, looking at the evidence spread before her, then at Ethan, then at me. This case, she said slowly, is not about a broken marriage. This is not about two people who simply couldn't get along. This is about power, control, and the systematic destruction of another person's autonomy and dignity. She turned to Ethan. You will have your opportunity to speak at sentencing. But understand this. Every piece of evidence presented here paints a picture of a man who viewed his wife not as a partner, but as property. And when that property didn't perform to your standards, you punished her. Ethan stared at the table. We'll reconvene tomorrow for my final ruling, Judge Reynolds said. Court is adjourned. That night, I sat in Mara's apartment, one hand on my belly, feeling the baby move. Whatever happens tomorrow, Mara said softly, you've already won. You found your voice. You stood up. That takes more courage than most people have in their entire lives.
I'm terrified.
I know, but you're also the strongest person I know. The baby kicked hard, making me wince and laugh at the same time. He agrees, I said. Tomorrow would bring the verdict. Tomorrow would decide whether justice was real, or just a word people said to make themselves feel better. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like myself again.
Scared.
Hurt, but whole. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread, social media, local news, the relentless curiosity of people who loved a dramatic story. The headline had been everywhere. Hospital footage exposes husband's abuse during wife's medical crisis. I sat at the plaintiff's table, Rachel on one side, Mara behind me, and tried to breathe steadily. My belly seemed enormous today, the baby unusually active, as if he knew something important was happening. Ethan sat across the aisle, his suit perfectly pressed, but his face haggard. Margaret wasn't in the courtroom today. She'd been subpoenaed for further questioning about her role in the abuse, and suddenly her son's trial was the least of her concerns. All rise. Judge Reynolds entered, her face composed but her eyes sharp. She'd spent the night reviewing everything. I could tell by the thick folder she carried, pages marked with colored tabs. We sat. The courtroom held its collective breath. This case, Judge Reynolds began, has been difficult to witness. Not because the law is unclear, but because the evidence reveals a level of cruelty that should never exist within a marriage, particularly not during such a vulnerable time as pregnancy. She looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Carter, this is not about anger. This is not about stress. This is not about financial pressure or maternal influence or any of the excuses your defense has offered. This is about truth. And truth, when buried, has a way of resurfacing where you least expect it, like on a hospital security camera at 2:47 in the morning. Someone in the gallery laughed quietly, then stifled it. You treated your wife as property, not as a person. You monitored her, controlled her, gaslit her into believing she was the problem. You endangered both her life and your unborn child's life because your ego mattered more than their safety. Judge Reynolds opened the folder. The medical evidence is clear. Mrs. Carter's condition was directly caused by prolonged stress and overwork that you imposed. The witness testimony is consistent. You are not a concerned husband, but a controlling one. And the video footage, she paused. The video footage speaks for itself. Ethan's hands clenched on the table. This court sentences you to 3 years imprisonment for domestic abuse, coercion, and reckless endangerment. Additionally, A permanent restraining order will be issued, prohibiting you from contacting Mrs. Carter or your child except through court-supervised visitation, pending evaluation. The gavel cracked against the bench. Furthermore, you will undergo mandatory counseling for abusers, complete anger management, and attend parenting classes should you ever be deemed fit for custody, which this court strongly doubts. The courtroom erupted. Journalists scrambled for their phones. Someone in the gallery gasped. Ethan sat frozen, his face drained of color. "No," he said, so quietly at first that maybe only I heard it. Then louder. "No, this isn't. I'm not going to prison for..." "Mr. Carter, you will maintain composure, or I will add contempt charges to your sentence." The bailiff approached. Ethan looked at his lawyer desperately, but she was already packing her briefcase, clearly done with this case. "This is insane." Ethan stood, pointing at me. "She ruined me. She destroyed my life over nothing." "You did that yourself," Judge Reynolds said coldly. Bailiff. Two officers moved toward Ethan. He backed away, his confidence finally, completely shattered. "Lena," he said, his voice breaking. "Lena, please. Tell them I didn't mean it."
We can fix this.
"We can." "Mr. Carter, you are in contempt." Bailiff, remove him. They cuffed him. Ethan struggled for a moment, then seemed to collapse inward. As they led him toward the side door, he looked back at me one last time. "You ruined me," he said. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I looked him directly in the eyes and spoke my truth. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." The courtroom slowly emptied. Margaret appeared briefly in the hallway outside, red-eyed, shaking, looking 10 years older. She opened her mouth as if to speak to me, then closed it. What could she possibly say? She turned and walked away, her perfect composure finally, irrevocably broken. Dr. Harris found me in the hallway, Mara at my side. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was an updated ultrasound scan, the baby's profile clear and perfect. "He's a fighter," Dr. Harris said with a gentle smile. "Strong heartbeat, healthy growth. He takes after his mother." I pressed my hand to my belly, tears sliding down my cheeks. "Thank you. For everything." "You fought for yourself," he said. "I just provided evidence. The courage was all yours." A week later, Mara received formal recognition from the hospital for her role in identifying and documenting domestic abuse. We stood in the hospital's administrative office, both of us slightly uncomfortable with the attention. The hospital's director shook Mara's hand and presented her with a certificate. "Because of your vigilance," he said, "we're implementing new protocols for identifying domestic abuse cases. Every staff member will receive training, and we're installing additional security measures in patient rooms." "I just did what was right," Mara said quietly. "That's what makes you extraordinary." Afterward, we walked to the cafeteria for terrible coffee and mediocre sandwiches, our celebration lunch. "They're calling it the Carter Protocol in the system," Mara said, shaking her head. "Like I'm some kind of hero." "You are," I said firmly. "You saved my life. My baby's life." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You saved your own life. I just made sure people saw what was really happening." 3 weeks later, I moved into my own apartment. It was small, a one-bedroom in an older building, nothing fancy. But it was mine. The windows faced east, letting in morning sunlight that painted the hardwood floors gold. I'd bought secondhand furniture, hung cheerful curtains, and set up a tiny nursery corner with a crib Mara had helped me assemble. Soft blue walls, a mobile with stars and moons, a rocking chair where I could feed my son when he arrived.
Peace.
Quiet.
Safety.
I stood in the living room one evening, 8.5 months pregnant now, and looked around at the space I created. No monitoring software.
No cameras.
No one watching my every move, waiting for me to fail. Just me, my baby, and the future we'd build together. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was from Judge Reynolds, handwritten, not an official court document. "Dear Mrs. Carter, cases like yours are why I became a judge. Not because I enjoy witnessing cruelty, but because I believe in the power of truth and justice to heal what cruelty has broken. You walked into my courtroom broken but determined. You left victorious not because you destroyed your abuser, but because you refused to let him destroy you. You reminded us that silence can be broken with evidence, and pain can end with courage. You reminded us that victims are not weak. They are warriors fighting invisible battles. Your son is lucky to have you as a mother. May you both find peace, joy, and all the happiness you deserve. With respect and admiration, Judge Margaret Reynolds. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box of important documents: divorce papers, the restraining order, medical records. Evidence of survival. The final scene came on a quiet Saturday morning. I woke early, as I always did now, not from anxiety, but from the baby's increasingly insistent kicks. He was due in 2 weeks, and apparently, he was ready to meet the world. I padded to the kitchen, made decaf coffee, and started breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit. The morning light streamed through the windows, warming my face. I wasn't cooking for anyone's approval. I wasn't rushing to meet someone else's standards. I was simply making breakfast because I was hungry, because I wanted to, because this was my kitchen in my home, and I could do whatever I wanted. I hummed while I cooked, some song I'd heard on the radio, cheerful and light. When the eggs were done, I plated them and sat at my small table, looking out the window at the street below. People walking their dogs, a neighbor watering plants on their balcony, the ordinary beautiful chaos of life happening all around me. The baby kicked, a strong, determined kick that made me laugh. "Good morning to you too," I said softly, placing my hand over the spot. I caught my reflection in the window, my face fuller now, healthier, my eyes clear, the dark circles fading. I looked like myself again. Or maybe I looked like someone new, someone stronger. "You're safe now," I whispered, to the baby and to myself. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed it. Here's a question for you. If you had evidence that could save your life but destroy your family's image, would you use it? Or would you stay silent to keep the peace? Drop your answer below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the strength it takes to choose yourself.